I'll start off and want to bring up on the screen a few slides here, if I can do that effectively. Can everybody see that, I hope? Yes?
Yep, we can see it.
All right,
Good.
fantastic. All right. So what we want to talk about organization development and systemic change, which is one of several thematic areas of mastery that we're going to be concentrating in with the upcoming program that starts this January of 2021. And I want to start out with a slide here. And I want to share something that one of my mentors, Eric Nielsen, who coincidentally also happened to be the original architect of the master's program in organization development, back in 1975 is when the very first Masters of OD launched. It was the first of such programs in the States. And Eric had a very favorite saying that when the first time I heard it, I kind of looked at him quizzically. He said, the only thing that could happen is what did happen. And my first reaction to it was, what the hell does that mean? But as I got older and got a little bit more education and experience under my belt, I began to understand just how profound of a comment that it was, talking about systemic change. And it wasn't, and what I realized was that the structure of the situation winds up predetermining what's possible and conversely what is not possible. And what that meant was that we tend to think of change sometime as being nothing more than episodic, that there is a beginning, that there's an end to it, without fully understanding what the connection is back to the institution. That whatever organization, whether it be for business, not-for-profit, mission-driven, social, political, whatever, there's an institutional framework. And along with that framework comes institutional norms, and they become institutional constraints. And there are incentives that promote certain types of behaviors. And those behaviors, depending on what it is that you're really trying to do, either are going to facilitate change, or depending on the nature of the change, are going to wind up getting in the way of it. These are structural, these are systemic elements and factors that we don't necessarily think about if we're really going to try to achieve transformational change. And it's for those very reasons why many organizational, social, and political systems, especially nowadays, find it difficult to change at a time when it's most needed. Now, when I was first thinking about this, and I was talking about it with Pat and with Chris, I happened to get an email from BAWB, which stands for Business as an Agent for World Benefit. And I found in their newsletter an article that was written by Chris and David Cooperrider and Ron Fry. And just out of curiosity, I decided to click on it. I said, yeah, I should know what they're doing. And we started reading it, and I was unduly impressed with what three of my colleagues had come up with, because I thought it was really extraordinary and spoke to the very slides that I just shared with you. And I want to turn that over to Chris, because I think that this article allowed me to, I'll use their term, pivot from point A to move on to point B. So Chris, if you can pick up on that, I would appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you, Harlow, and thank you, Jesse, also for your introduction. I want to start with sort of a meta observation for all of you, that Harlow and I are working together right now on some very interesting redesign projects, pedagogic redesign projects, and he mentioned this article that was just published with two other colleagues, David Cooperrider and Ron Fry. And on top of that, here in this group is Ignacio Pavez, who is a doctoral student from the OB department, who is actually taking the lead in a multi-year research and publication process that includes me and another PhD student. And we are just at the final stages of submitting this paper from a longer research that I'm actually very excited about on positive impact companies. And so, the observation I want to make is that one of the things in the MPOD program and the OB department more generally is that there really is a great degree of collaboration with students and faculty and between faculty. And so that's something that you may have had experience in other departments, but typically, in many academic departments, it's siloed. People have their own area of research, and there's not a lot of collaboration or interest to collaborate with other faculty members, and it's occasional with students. But I think one of the strengths of this program is really the relational aspect. And as Harlow can tell you, part of the design that Harlow has brought to MPOD over the years is a strong field-based relationship component with organizations that we study. So anyway, I just wanted to put in a little plug. Well, first of all, welcome, Ignacio. It's nice to see you in this context. Well, since we have a project that you're taking the lead on. So Harlow, described the institutional structure that tends to dictate to some extent what is possible and what is not possible in terms of change. Another big framing for change, particular systems level change, are the assumptions that we hold about the organizational context. And this is an idea that came from Peter Drucker. So in 1994, he wrote a Harvard Business Review article called The Theory of the Business. And in it, he said, as you see on the slide, the theory of the business when the theory of the business no longer works, by which he meant that there was no longer an alignment between the organization and its complex emerging environment, then businesses run into trouble. And the example he used in that Harvard Business Review article were a few companies, among which was General Motors. And what he said was that General Motors in the 20th century was very successful for 7 decades because it had a theory of the business that was based on looking at the US society as being fairly homogeneous in values and segmented into stable income groups, so that as a car company, it could have these independent divisions, which were, Chevrolet, Pontiac, Oldsmobile, Buick, Cadillac, plus GMC. I hope I got that right, because I didn't grow up in this country, so some of my Americana is not always very right. But it had this great sort of sequential set of brands and cars that all it needed to do was assure good resale value. And since the background assumptions about what Americans wanted, was to start with a starter car and that they would always want to go to a next higher quality car with certain characteristics that were a little more luxurious and so on. It could move up from Chevys and Pontiacs all the way up to Buicks and Cadillacs. That proved to be very successful until the 80s. And then all of a sudden, there were a number of different things that changed. You know, the assumptions about those assumptions about the environment no longer worked. So that led my colleagues, David Cooperrider and Ron Fry and I to think about, well, you know, what are the big assumptions that we all walk around with in business and in life, frankly, that no longer serve us, and that in fact may be pernicious because they are leading us to make decisions or to formulate leadership goals, or to influence corporate cultures, organizational cultures, and to drive operations in organizations that are somehow no longer valid. And so what we did is we came up with 7 what we call legacy assumptions. These are legacy assumptions from the 20th century, which I want to show you here in a minute. You see them here on the left. So if you, actually, can you put that in slide presentation mode so that we, it might be easier that way. There we go, thank you. So because I just want to focus on one set at a time. So really what you see on the left here are legacy assumptions that companies and many of us walk around with, which underlie in some ways our assumptions about how reality works, and that we think are obsolete, if not dangerous. So let's just look briefly at them, and then I'm going to ask you to choose 1 or 2 that you think, and to tell us why you chose them. But what are 1 or 2 that you think are particularly problematic for those who are running organizations today? So very, very quickly, and I think that they can speak for themselves, the idea that the more we grow, the better off we are. This idea of endless growth is now being questioned by leading academics, Kate Raworth at Oxford and Henderson at Harvard, and many others are really pushing on that idea that endless growth is not the answer to a healthy society. And this related idea that the more we shop, the happier we are, so that what people really want is more income, and with more income, they can buy more material things, and with more material things, they are happier. And there's a lot of clinical research, Marty Seligman and others showing that, in fact, happiness comes from many other aspects having to do primarily with a greater sense of connection to yourself. In other words, your life purpose, connection to high quality connections to others, connections to nature, and connections to the transcendent. The third, this idea that we progress fastest by focusing on what's wrong, that's something that Weatherhead School is very strong on, in the sense that we are known, I think, for our scholarship in appreciative inquiry and more generally positive organizational scholarship, which focuses not only on instances of positive deviance in organizations, but also on how do you lift up and bring out the best even in ordinary organizations. So while positive organizational scholarship, as you would get it at the University of Michigan and elsewhere, is very good in terms of teaching people how to study positive instances of positive deviation, in other words, instances of excellence, with their theory being that if you want to understand excellence, you should study excellence. At Case, and with appreciative inquiry and a lot of the work around appreciative inquiry, the idea is that we have methods, whole system strength-based methods that allow us to work with stakeholders to really lift up the best in an organization, bring out the best in human beings, and lift up extraordinary performance out of ordinary organizations. The fourth legacy assumption is the rights of the individual preempt collective rights, and this is something we face right now, unfortunately, with COVID-19. Very different, for example, from Eastern cultures, where there's a greater emphasis on collective duty rather than individual rights. And the question is more about the balance, but it seems that in the West right now, the balance is heavily on rights of individuals, even if there's a collective cost. Government regulation is contrary to freedom. That's an assumption that has gotten quite a bit worse in the last few decades. Actually, since Ronald Reagan, there's been a concerted push by the Mont Pelerin Society and the sort of so-called neoliberal movement. There's good evidence from Rebecca Henderson at Harvard that trust in government regulation is at an all-time low in 2019, sorry. It might have been 100 years ago also, but certainly last year. The sixth is that nature is a resource for consumption, that it should be a playground for us, or that, you know, we are, at best, we are stewards of the oceans and the land and the air, but that it's really here to serve us, and that somehow humanity is above the rest of nature. And the last one is science must be viewed with skepticism. I think anybody who's been following the news, I don't need to add any details, unfortunately, explaining that one. So what I'd like to do is ask you, as you look at this, sort of rank order 1 and 2, the things that you think are most critical right now, sort of in the way for business leaders and perhaps more generally for people who are trying to accomplish, you know, professionally in the business world or in the nonprofit world. So can you stop viewing the screen for a second so we can just get to a conversation about this, and we'll come back to the slides. Yeah, okay. So good to see you all. Tell me, what are your thoughts about the 7 legacy assumptions, and which ones really strike you as you know, things that are particularly holding us back? Dom.
Yeah, so I think number 3, we progressed by focusing on sort of what's wrong, struck a chord with me. So I work for a corporation. It's really driven by high performance, and we're going through quite a bit of change, not just in our business, but also with everything going on outside of the walls as well. But it struck me because one of the things I heard about MPOD and appreciate about the Weatherhead Organizational Behavior Group is the focus on appreciative inquiry and strength-based scholarship, as you put it. So that one really stuck out to me because I do feel within, I guess I can speak to my company, but maybe just in the corporate world in general, there is quite a bit of focus on fixing what's wrong. Instead of defaulting to where are we excellent and how can we study that, or how can we scale that and spread that throughout the organization. So just, I guess, from a practical, the way I would want to apply some of these learnings from this program, that really stood out to me.
Sorry, just from a time perspective, I think we have time for just 1 or 2 more. And if you could just sort of be pretty quick, you know, what the legacy assumption is and why you think it. Anna.
Yes, thank you, Chris. Well, the 2 that I've picked, the first one, the more we shop, the happier we are. And, it resonated with me because, first of all the positive psychology studies and Barbara Fredrickson work and Martin Seligman, sort of my background as a coach. And also on the bigger picture, I think, there is a way to make a corporate world better and a happier place for all of us if we approach from the strength-based approach rather than just hunting the profits and efficiencies, etc. Because we remain humans when we enter the workplace. And my dream world is where we don't have to wear different hats and stay who we are as we are living our purpose. So we continue to live that purpose in the corporate world. And the second is about nature. I'm a big lover of nature, and I think it's time for us as a human race to reconsider how our relationship with nature and all other living creatures is just very personal. Thank you.
Very, very nicely said. We have time for one more. Lauren?
Yeah, please. I'll definitely agree with Dom that number 3 really struck me as agree with Anna that Seligman's work rather on hope and optimism can be learned, and we can, it's work, of course, but we can get there to take a more hopeful or optimistic or positive approach. And also number 1 struck me. I've been thinking a lot about growth versus scale, and how business schools, I think as a general statement, capitalism as a general statement focuses on growth, but thinking about scale, especially during this pandemic, I think has maybe helped me think about this. How can we reach more people without using all of the resources it requires to grow per se? So that one's sort of making me think a little differently.
Yeah. Good. I hope you'll make a big difference in that area, Lauren, because there's a huge need, and I think there's a huge potential to make a difference in that. Harlow or Jesse, could you just quickly put up the slide again, that 4th slide? And okay, thank you. If you can put it in, and go to the, there. So just very quickly, we don't have time really to spend a lot of time on these, but these were some of the new assumptions that we're suggesting would be a better theory of the business in terms of matching assumptions about the external environment of business and how firms operate. So, the first is that companies can do well by doing good. There's still too much a belief that that's not the case, and I think it's becoming every day, every week, every month, it's becoming clear that companies are acquiring the skills now, and they have the tools, many of which, by the way, we teach at Weatherhead, how to do well by doing good. How can you create value for society and the environment in ways that allow a company to be even more successful, to create even more value for its customers and for its owners. David is leading the charge, David Cooperrider is leading the charge on this idea of positive institutions, institutions that are built on strengths and that refract those strengths outwards, and that are not driven sort of either top down or bottom up, but are really whole system approaches to managing change in those institutions. And that's, of course, where Appreciative Inquiry Summit methodology is as powerful as it is. Flourishing employees are key to positive institutions. And that's no surprise, but we all have to laugh, of course, because so many companies will tell you, oh yes, our employees are our most important assets, right? How many times have we heard that? And then when you ask the employees, or you look at the Glassdoor ratings, it's still that they feel like cogs in the wheel. So I think there's a lot that can be done and that must be done to treat the whole human being at work, and to introduce ways of working, to introduce workspaces, to introduce practices that allow employees bring their values to work, to feel more connected to many of the things that Marty Seligman and Barbara Fredrickson, Hannah, that you talk about, you know, the ability to bring in positive emotions that build consequential resources for resilience come into play. Then, you know, the idea that collaborative partnerships across sectors benefit all is one. Stakeholder-centric firms benefit their shareholders. We're starting to see more LC3 and B corporations and other forms of social enterprise. And ironically, they're growing very fast. And one of the reasons that some studies, some scholarly studies are showing now that these so-called stakeholder-centric firms are actually outperforming their shareholder peers. You know, so there's sort of a principle of obliquity at work. If you're not focused just on short-term shareholder value, you paradoxically can end up with greater success as a business than those that do. And then artificial intelligence and big data are not sort of things in themselves, but are gateways to solving society's challenges. I think this is part of what we're all grappling with now. And finally, and this is probably the one that I'm most interested in my research, leadership development requires inner work, meaning that leaders who do good because that's who they are have to attend to their own well-being and their own elevating their consciousness of connectedness and wholeness. And I teach a whole course on that called Quantum Leadership, which is very much an experiential based course that is about having leadership development anchored in practices that give people an experience of wholeness and connectedness. So as a way to raise their awareness of how their actions impact others and future generations. So Harlow, with that, I just want to make sure I'm not taking up too much time. Is there anything else that you would want me to say or develop?
Chris, I think at this point, I mean, I think that the last one we can leave for people to get to participate in MPOD, but I want to leave enough time for folks to be able to ask any questions and get in a dialogue with us. So at this point, I'm going to stop the share and then open it up to everybody who has any questions or to actually get in a discussion with us, if that's okay.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, Dom.
Yes. So I heard mentioned the idea of field study being an approach as part of the MPOD program. Harlow, could you talk a little bit more about what does that look like, or what is that experience like?
Yeah, this has been one of the most intriguing shifts that we've been thinking about, probably along the same lines of the assumptions, is that education has its own challenges when it comes to figuring out what where the theory of the business, or we can say the theory of the educational institution, may not match what's going on. In fact, they got their faces pushed directly into that reality. And one of the things we were working on even before the pandemic occurred, aside from the format changes, which aren't as important as what we needed to do with the pedagogy. And we felt that this is supposed to be an applied program. But some of the feedback that we've gotten in years past, I mean, aside from we love the program, we love everything that we're doing, we get wonderful reviews on it. They were saying we're having more difficulty applying what we're learning in the field. And so what the faculty and I did was we sat down and we identified what are the thematic areas of strength that we can legitimately lay claim to. And so one of them, as Chris indicated, was leadership. We have, emotionally intelligent leadership. We have coaching with compassion. We have what we refer to as inclusive leadership, which is extraordinarily relevant right now in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so that's the leadership, I'll call it suite, that we're looking at. The other was what Chris is beginning to highlight, which was organization development and systemic change. We originally were saying, well, it's managing change. We said, no, it's got to be more than that. People have to understand what is it that is required to accomplish that systemic change. So I'm going to stop there. There's a third area that deals with team effectiveness. But the experiences that we've identified are three categories. One, there are teacher-constructed challenges and we're calling, these are the three thematic areas of mastery learning. So this is a mastery pedagogy which has specific implications to it. So one is a teacher-constructed challenge that students will perform. And then we talked about two subsequent individual field projects. So I'll give an example. Chris and I were talking about the prospect that one of the teacher-constructed challenges would be in collaboration with BAWB, Business as an Agent of World Benefit. And BAWB has relationships with, I hope I'm not overstating this, scores of companies who are working on one or more of 17 strategic development goals that grew out of the United Nations Compact. Was that accurate, Chris? How'd I do? So
very understated.
There you go. Okay. So it's probably hundreds of organizations, but we thought that it would be fabulous if we coupled a student with these flourishing enterprises, very enterprises that Chris was talking about, those who are effective because they are focused on doing what is good. And so whether it happens to be social responsibility or sustainability coupled with economic prosperity. And we thought that that would be one great opportunity for a student to do that during one of the semesters. And then if they could take that experience and see if they could implant it into their own organization. Now we understand that that may not always be possible depending on what the priorities and the agenda happens to be for your existing organization. But that would be a logical next step if they could take what they learned in one of the flourishing enterprises back home in their own organization. And then the second individual field project would be the other field experience. What we've done is we've taken 3 courses that I continue to teach, or I used to teach, but they were more, I don't want to say didactic, but they were all experiential. But what we've done is we've created my 3 courses as the placeholders for those field experiences. And so as a directorate, I have primary accountability for working one-on-one with each student as they perform each of those respective projects. And then what we would do as needed is add in a content expert another faculty member as needed to do that. And we feel a third part, which would be great, is to be able to get somebody from your organization who might serve as your sponsor, and they become part of your development team with us. And those would be, this is what we've been cobbling together as the applied mastery learning component of the program as we get into the next iteration of MPOD. We're not going to, I'm confident we're not going to have everything down perfect, but I think that if we treat this no different than we treat change, which is as a continuous series of activities as opposed to just thinking about something that has a beginning and an end, is that I think we'll keep getting better and better at it. And then as you graduate from the program, you become critical alumni that can continue to play a role with new students and with other colleagues. So apologize for the lengthy explanation, but those are the things that that we've been working on and focusing on. Working feverishly to get into place as we hurtle toward January. Does that answer your question, Don?
Yes, thank you. That was
okay. Okay. We're pretty excited about it and really charmed up about it because I think it's going to open a very different portal that we haven't had before.
Just noticing the time. I don't know if we have one final question or comment, or Chris, if you want to make a closing remark or two.
I'd like to leave it open for questions. So Anna,
Do we
Lauren.
have time for another one?
Yeah, go ahead. Absolutely.
So just to honor a PhD students of your school who are here, and my question is actually, could you define or differentiate the focus of the master program and PhD program the way you see it? And theoretically, I know the difference in my first half of life in Russia. I have a master degree and a PhD in applied economics. So I know, the purpose of the PhD in academia world, but I really wanted to understand your view, how you differentiate your programs, since both they seem to be pretty applied. So I wanted to understand that a little bit better.
Do you want me to start, Harlow, or do you want to?
Yeah, fine.
Okay. So this is how I see it. Not, Harlow is the program director here, so I think he may have a sort of a deeper sense of it. But just from teaching in both programs, the OB PhD program is a deep scholarship journey that is designed for people who want to go on to teach at the university level. That's really the primary purpose. The MPOD program, first of all, is a little unique among master's programs because you can't really compare it to masters in social change or masters or MBAs and so on and so forth like that. But it is much more applied scholarship. It's really about people who are wanting to make a difference in applying their scholarship to relevant issues. And the fact is that it's positive organizational development, so it really draws in a lot of people who are interested in the human aspect of organizations, in unleashing the human potential, in how do you make organizations effective, and they ask the questions, effective for what purpose? So it's you know, it's, you know, I like both programs for different reasons, but if you have a, if you have a streak of activism in you, you know, academic activism, and you want to shape the world for the better, then I think the MPOD program has a lot going for it. So Harlow, anyway, that was just a few
Yeah.
brief reflections.
Yeah, Anna, two responses is that I'm very appreciative of mentors and faculty that I've had, and I want to give you one of mine was Don Wolf. Don Wolf went ahead and said that we have a tendency, as Chris was indicating in his chart here, that we tend to dichotomize the world, and we do it in education as well. And he said, we used to think that there were practitioners and there were scholars, and never the twain shall meet. He said there's actually 3 branches to the tree, and many tributaries coming off each of those 3 branches. So he said, yeah, there's pure practitioners who that's all their focus is quite different, and it's 100% concentrating on what, you know, how do they do consulting and how do they engage in a practice of organization development. Scholarship, which is entirely research oriented and creation of knowledge. He said there's a third category, and this is what I want to analogize MPOD to, and he called it an action researcher. And he said there are people that go into the field and engage in the practice of organization development and systemic change. But what they do periodically is they stop and they take stock of what it is that they're learning. And as a result of going through that, they try to capture that in some way, shape, or form. That's how I actually start out in the days that when we were going through our PhD program, you know, we had like 12 people in the program, which is unheard of today unless you're a monster university. And half of us wound up going a practitioner route, and the other half went a scholarly academic route. And I wound up going down the action research path. And periodically I would stop and write an article, albeit for a practitioner journal, but sometimes for like Academy of Management. And I think that's, so I think there's a third branch here, and I think that's where MPOD really fits into, because we've had a ton of our students who have written stuff subsequently, written articles, written books, written exercises. We have a smaller handful that eventually went into either Doctor of Management or DBA programs or PhD programs, but never quite left the practitioner, left it alone. One of the courses that I teach as part of the PhD seminar is on change management. One of the very first questions I ask the students is that, let's assume that everything that you want to do with your dissertation, you accomplish it. And I said, so what? And I said, I'm not trying to be a smart aleck, but so what? What is it that you want to grow from the research you're doing? How do you want to make a difference? What are the footprints you're going to leave in the sand? So even if you're in the PhD program, I would say the same thing. And I think what's unique about, I would say, Case Western Reserve University as a whole, and in particular, the Weatherhead School of Management, if our faculty and administrators are really paying attention, is that's what makes us very, very unique. It's our connection with the community, with the society, with global players. I don't mean it just for to say, oh boy, I'm working with large organizations. It's how do we make a difference that is a positive difference? And I think that's what makes our university unique, is that because even in the Cleveland community, is that our relationship with like the medical school between the Cleveland Clinic, University Hospital, Metro General is quite vital. And I think the same thing applies whether you're talking about the School of Management or you're talking about the engineering school. It doesn't matter. That's what makes Case Western unique and different from other institutions. A little long-winded there, but I mean it's an excellent question, but it has to invite and get to understand who we are.
Thank you, Harlow and Christopher. I appreciate you taking like a multifaceted approach. You actually answered, I mean, gave a lot more details that I hoped for, and I appreciate that.
Okay, good. All right, Jesse, I'm going to turn it back to you. I know that we ran a little bit over, even though we started a little late, but
That's okay.
I'm glad we had the chance to interact with everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. Great questions. And I'm glad everybody was able to stay on there at the end. I think that was really, as a current PhD student, also helpful to hear Harlow and Chris's insights on that. And I made a note to revisit the paper I wrote for Harlow's class. So this is good. But anyways, thank you so much to everybody for joining tonight. Feel free to reach out to Pat or Harlow if you have any questions about the MPOD program. And I'm sure Chris would also invite any follow-up questions as well. So absolutely. I am going to email, this session was recorded. I'm going to upload it to YouTube and email that link to Pat, and she's going to send that out later tonight. If you have any interest in going back and rewatching parts of the video or all of the video. So take care and have a wonderful evening. And we look forward to connecting again in the future.
Thank you.
Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Nice to see you all. Bye, Harlow. Bye, Chris.
Bye-bye. Good seeing you, Ignacio.
Yeah, good to see you.